going to go ahead and call this meeting to order and declare a quorum of 6 members present. We'll start with workshop item C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2017-18 budget development. Mr. Williams has reported in. He is healthy. He's not in the hospital, but he will not be attending. That had to do with the pre-meeting discussion. So, Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin. Chuck, are we hearing this okay? Thank you. Item C1 regarding the 2017-2018 budget. We have some better news, some rosier financial outlook for us this month compared to last month. I will remind everyone on the board that we're about midway through the development of the budget. We started with a preliminary look in March and then real numbers last month in April. The budget will need to be adopted and a tax rate set by August 31st. So we plan to do that in the regular scheduled August meeting. So we still have a number of variables outstanding that we'll find out from the state legislature and other folks. And with a little bit more information about where we are in the process is Mike Martindale, Deputy Superintendent for Business and Operations.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. And yes, it's better this time because it couldn't be worse than last time. So as we progress, and I'd like to bring the board up to date on latest projections for 17-18 budget. But of course, before we get there, just a preview of the upcoming months. Of course, I'll give you an update here momentarily based on our most recent information from the appraisal district and values. June, we traditionally, of course, will provide an updated budget with truer values as they go through the review process, and BK keeps us up to date over the next several months. But in June, we typically come with our compensation plan proposal for the 17 or the following school year as well. So we'll do that next month. Continue an update on the budget in July. July the 18th is the date of our July meeting. We'll get final values from BCAT on the 24th. So we should have a pretty close estimate of where things will actually land by our July the 18th meeting. And of course, August will bring the proposed budget to the board for consideration with the appropriate M&O and INS tax rate to support that budget. So we begin the budgeting process through the spring. Of course, each campus and department can make requests as far as personnel and exceptional items. As we've moved through this process and Cabinet has took those requests in and reviewed those, we ended up with a little over $4 million in requests for new personnel. This is outside of that involved with Pecan Trail. That's a separate number. Exceptional item request total just shy of $2 million from our campuses and departments that Cabinet had to review. As of our last Cabinet meeting last week, as we reviewed the different requests, we had approved just shy of $814,000 worth of new personnel. And again, I'll give you a number on Pecan Trail here in just a few minutes. This is separate of Pecan Trail intermediate opening this August. These new personnel items include, of course, the principal for Welborn Middle School and a secretary to join our principal in January of 2018. The addition of 3 new elementary teachers to accommodate our required 22-to-1 ratio. The addition of 2 AVID teachers at the high school level for increased growth in the program, and also some at the intermediate level to meet the needs of the number of kids getting involved in AVID. The addition of 1 core area teacher at the middle school level to assist with class sizes, and 1.75 FTEs for Spanish. That actually 1 serves between a split between middle school and high school, and 0.75 is to increase our course offerings and capacity at College View. That's the same with the high school choir position, 0.25. Yes, you can have 0.25 FTE. But again, that's to increase our offerings at College View High School, and the addition of 1 core area high school teacher to the general fund. couple periods. $83. No, I'm kidding. Continued in that $814,000 number. Of course, our chief academic officer, that is on the agenda for later this evening for the board's consideration and approval. Also, a shared request between our CNI and technology departments. This position will provide tech support district-wide and also support with our instructional materials, and of course from our maintenance and operations, a periodic maintenance specialist. This is someone that is proactive with the maintenance of our facilities. Pecan Trail is tracking just under 1.4 million at this point in time, 1.395,200. That's in addition to the 814,000 that I just shared with the group as far as other new personnel approved. For exceptional item requests, we've approved a little over 100,000 at this point in time. With our assessment department, that is a web-based component that allows the campuses and district to track all things associated with state mandated testing, booklets, class rosters, so on and so forth. Ethics training, those are online modules that be made available as part of our staff development training beginning this summer district-wide. GT professional development, all new employees to the district, professional employees require 30 hours of GT training as they enter the district. This cost is associated with making that an online module. We've been handling that in person. The addition and replacement of student desks at both of our high schools, and increasing the number of science goggles and sanitizing cabinets at our existing intermediates and one middle school to help with our focus and movement in science instruction, and technology software to help manage our mobile devices. Items that have not been approved or completely turned away but are still under consideration on new personnel side runs right about $1 million. Those consist of a couple of para positions requested at various elementary schools, the addition of a half position of an orchestra teacher, the possibility of adding trainers at the middle school level, one CTE teacher at the high school, that would be in engineering, architecture, and construction sciences. From our CNI department, 2 instructional tech coaches, a campus technician, and a social studies coordinator. In addition to those, these items, these new personnel requests that are on hold come more from our operations and business area, carpenter, custodian, electrician, grounds worker, HVAC techs, and this is due to our increased square footage. As you all know, we're adding facilities very quickly. Staff accountant in the business office, and in our special programs, an educational diagnostician and an LSSP. On hold items under exceptional item request, new curriculum and additional materials to support the growth and popularity of our robotics program at our middle schools. Requests for laptops from both our high school counselors' offices. The enhancement of foreign language lab at Consol. The replacement of some pianos in our fine arts programs. And of course, some vehicles that would be associated with some of the on hold staffing requests from the grounds and operations area. Our current projections continue to hold at the 2.9% on our ADA. That's the latest from Templeton Demographics, and I've held steady since our last projection on this item. Been tracking our last budget projection. I used 6% after visiting with Mark Price and BCAD. Comfortable with increasing that projected growth on our local values up to 9%, which has a significant impact on our previous projection.
Some of you may concur after opening the mail.
Yes. Yes.
I got that piece of mail.
Yes, I simply report, Mr. Nugent. I do not set the values. So on the appropriation side, some adjustments we made due to the recognized adjustments on the revenue side. On new payroll cost for salary adjustments, previously I had $1.26 million. I did move that up to 1.65 to provide us a little more capacity with whatever decisions might be made regarding salary adjustments, whether that be TASB's recommendation or not. This just provides us a little more capacity to do something with salary adjustments next month. The intermediate school, plus the new positions that I mentioned to you that tracked around 800 and 1.4, those combined add an additional 2.2 million to payroll. Our projected deficit at this point in time with that adjustment brings us in at 3.6 last month. With 6% on local value growth, we were tracking at 5.4 million. In relation to our cash flow projections versus our balance on our fund balance, the yellow line is 17.5% of the projected appropriations for that corresponding year. It's just kind of a good warning line to track things with. If we go back to last August when we adopted the current budget that we're in, that's representative of the fund balance in the red line. So you could see how we drew down our fund balance for the corresponding years as we move out. And that projection crossed over our 17.5% mark going into the 2020 school year. The green line was last month. As you can tell, the impact of initially projecting a $5 million deficit on the budget increased the negative slope of that number significantly, crossing our 17.5% cash flow line moving into the 2019-2020 year. The blue line represents the projections based today after adjusting the local revenue up. Of course, the drawdown on our fund balance, and then that projection kind of flattens itself out and brings itself just a little bit in above that cash flow number in the 2020-2021 school year. You can definitely see us opening new campuses in this line graph. This is Pecan Trail, the drawdown on the fund balance. That's due to the payroll it takes to open a new facility. This is Wilmer Middle School. This will be elementary number 10. And then we don't currently have a campus projected out beyond that. So then you get this flattening because you're not carrying such a heavy payroll increase. So, no, sir. This is current funding system. This does not do anything with regards to the impact House Bill 21 could have, which could, again, improve our current standing even more. Through the way House Bill 21 will benefit us, with its influence on the rate of recapture. So basically we benefit because the amount of recapture will be reduced. Basically we get to keep more of our own money. That's what it boils down to, Dr. Wesson.
Do we have a projection on what we had when the school was opening for this next year? Do you know what we projected out as being using the fund balance?
For Pecan Trail?
Uh-huh.
I think we put in there originally about 1.5.
Yes, I've been using 1.5 for a majority of the time.
Okay, and then when you have those on hold items, how will you decide, or when will you decide to take those off after we get that House Bill 21? Or
We typically review those as a cabinet as we make progress and get updates from BCAD. So really it depends on how the amount of the value under review and how those start to come in and what happens with the projected loss on the initial values they give us. So it really boils down to adjustments in revenue and what we're able to afford. If the 9% is pretty close from the beginning, then we wouldn't be approving many more exceptional items. If we are allowed some capacity because the initial projected losses come in better than what BCAD expects, then we may be able to build some capacity to approve some things. But I think those decisions will be primarily driven from a financial standpoint, unfortunately, at this point in time. That's my opinion. Dr. Ely may differ.
You took the mic.
To rephrase what you said, is that the 9% growth is now considered a baseline, and there is the possibility that the overall impact might be higher than that.
Correct. There's also the specter of House Bill 21, although I don't anticipate that really going forward, although it could. We'll just see how the politics work out on that. The other thing that's looming is the is Senate Bill 1, which is the state budget for the 2-year cycle. And the committee, the conferees are together working on that right now, and really nobody knows what's going to happen with that. Will additional allotments for dyslexia students make it into it? Will certain other things make it into it that can change a little bit our funding template? So any of those things could affect the amount of revenue that we get. So those are the things that we continue to monitor over the next couple months.
When one uses the word looming, most people have a tendency to go in the negative. So I'm assuming based on what you just said, looming might not necessarily represent the situation that if the Senate were to go forward, that perhaps we would get more money versus less money.
That is a possibility. That's what we're looking. That's what we're monitoring to see if we could.
Okay,
We're not waiting for the axe to fall.
Okay, just clarify that this is.
Sorry for the negative connotation of looming.
Well, and maybe it's just me. In engineering, if you say looming, it is not.
That's not good.
Dr.
So-
Yoke and I interpret it as negative too.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale, for that support.
Martindale may never get the microphone back.
Well,
I
it's
may ask
interesting.
him a question. I mean, we're communicating.
Well, what's interesting to me is that we have these exceptional items to me, like when we look at money at home, okay, exceptional items would be things that we want versus what we needed. Is that the same language? I mean, are we using the same language here? Or like, no. Okay, so you have exceptional and then you have these lists, and do you prioritize those? And I assume like, well, we have so much money so we can take that one or that one, perhaps. I don't know. You know what? I'm not struggling because of anything you all are doing. I'm struggling because are we not being able to pay for the things that we need because of, well, obviously the financial situation of the state, but I mean, I keep wanting to reiterate that with the public because I want them to understand we're watching these pennies, literally, and are we not getting what we need? And they need to hear that because we need to continue to talk to our legislators about that.
So let me just talk a little bit about the exceptional items process and why that's a part of our budgeting process now. In the past, when something came up in a particular department or budget or extracurricular group or whatever, when they had a large need that was kind of exceptional, it just came up, we needed to replace band uniforms or we needed to replace, some infrastructure at a certain place, and it wasn't built within the budget, they would approach the superintendent, the cabinet at any time throughout the year and make a pitch for, we really need this, and we had to try to determine, did we have the capacity to do this or did we not? So what we have done is we've changed that to one time a year. We ask everybody to put their exceptional items in there, and there's a range of needs to wants in that list of, about $2 million there. Some are very much things that we would really like to have and like to have right now, and some of them are, if we really had a rosy impact budget outlook and we'd like to have that. So that kind of runs the gamut. What we do as an administrative team is we look through those and we get the information from the director or the principal or whoever is making the request, and we try to look at those and prioritize them ourselves and try to figure out, you know, what is the greatest need right now, what impacts the most students, and make those decisions. And chief among those at this point in the year is what capacity do we have under the budget to be able to do that. So that's why we did the initial awarding of those on April the 28th. And while we continue to look at these and kind of show that list up there, things that are still there being considered. There have been some no's already that have gone out, some things that we knew we wouldn't be able to get to this time. So we try to have one time a year where we could, look at everything kind of side by side and know what our financial picture is going to be, and we just work it through the budget process like we do here. And so to answer your question, if you look under the appropriations columns there, you'll see under contracted services, the 6,300s, 6,400s, we're typically adding 1% a year or 0% or whatever as we go through, and these oftentimes are in excess of those zeros or 1%. It really is an exceptional deal that maybe we can pay for at one time. So we evaluate those. For some folks who have items on the list, they may be there 2 or 3 years before they're able to be granted, which is something that we continue to work through.
Will you be able to, I know last year you was able to fund some of the things from different budgets that were not used. Is that the same plan for this year?
So we obviously look at what we're able to use federal funds for, whether it's special programs or current technology or other areas. So we make sure we look at those. We also have 2013 and 2015 deferred maintenance bonds out there. That's some of these things that come up are infrastructure or bond funds can be used for because they're maintenance projects. And so we will capture some of those with our deferred maintenance dollars in there.
There's also, Mr. Schaefer, the opportunity. Last year, we were able to do some of those exceptional item requests through the general fund for 15-16. That's because we were recognizing student growth higher than was originally projected. So that generated some additional revenue for us to be able to do that. For example, if we get through the middle of this next school year and we're tracking much stronger than 2.9%, we're tracking 3.5, 3.6. And because of that, we're recognizing a higher projection on our foundation payment from the state. Then at that time, the cabinet typically will go back and review those items that were on hold to see if there are some things that we could pick up because we're recognizing additional revenue because of unanticipated growth, which is not the case current year. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for including that because last year we were able to do that because of increased student enrollment over projections, and we're not able to do it this current school year.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Okay, the 9% increase for the local property tax. If, I may say this wrong, but let me see if I can get the question communicated. If no one won their valuation appeal, I'm looking at you. What would that percentage look like? Do we know or have an estimate?
When the appraisal district provides us their initial estimates, they build in a projected loss that we account for as well that they anticipate or to lose through the review process. This year, the projected losses they included, and I obviously have incorporated, is 5%, which is significantly higher than the historical projected losses that they have used in the past. So that increases the degree of change significantly.
Okay. And this is the floor.
Yes, sir. I've captured their 5% loss in their projections. I've utilized that. Also, their frozen values, and I utilized our frozen collections from last year in this number. So I try to be as aggressive as possible, but yet conservative, if that makes sense. Otherwise, you can't. I know I completely.
So, Mr. Martindale, what is the higher number?
It's much much higher than that.
Mr. Martindale, what is the higher number?
You're being deposed.
And
The appraisal
Here, I bet.
district has included a 5% projected loss on their initial values. So that number could change anywhere within that 5%.
It could go up to 14.
well, that's why, well, but see, is it a percent or is it a percent of that number? And that's what I was trying to get him.
Percentage points.
Okay, well,
Okay.
that's, my way of hearing math is a little different. That's why I was asking.
We absolutely will not recognize.
No, and
So
that's fine.
Very close to their projected numbers.
it's
So-
usually on the 2% to 3% point loss. But I think this year is a little different because of the increased number of multifamily that are in here and now on the tax rolls. They don't really know how to treat that. So that's why they have a bigger potential loss in there, and don't know what's going to happen through the protest process. But
I think it's important to recall that a 1% change is equivalent to about $800,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
875 to be exact.
870. I went to college 8 years. Anybody else? Yeah, well, I wasn't too bright, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to C2, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to policy FC local concerning school boundary adjustment. Dr. Ely.
thank you, Dr. Yokin, members of the board. We have been talking about proposed policy FC local for a few months now. We began our discussion in January and talked about the need. Really, we came here and talked about the need to be transparent with the public, to let people who move into our community understand kind of how College Station, the community in College Station ISD handles our enrollment growth, including many of the options that are available to the school board and the school district. We thought it was important to put that policy in place and put it forward-facing on our website and include some things in that policy that are important, like an annual review of our data, both our school capacity data, our enrollment projections for 5 years, and the composition of our schools in regards to the percentage of students who are on free and reduced lunch. That has been built into this proposed policy, as well as different options that are available to the administration and board when our growth, our schools become nearing capacity, and when our schools become, especially at the secondary level, a little disparate in regards to their student compositions. In the past couple of months, we've been talking about primarily the process we use under one of those options included under board policy FC local, and that would be redrawing of attendance boundaries. And obviously that's a very important process for us to be able to determine how we want to move forward. 3 important constituencies there: the community, the board, and the administration. What role does each one of those groups play, and what process could be put into place that would work well in all types of boundary adjustment situations. Instead of coming to this meeting and kind of starting with a blank sheet of paper, took the opportunity to put together some draft options of what different scenarios, different processes could look like, and shared that with the board over the weekend. Asked you folks to look over them so we could have a discussion regarding those. And Mr. Hutchison will help me find out where this is. Nope. There it is. And so with each one of these, for the people who in the audience who have not seen this, I'd like to just kind of briefly go through them, if that's okay with the board. Or actually, I'm sorry, let me back up. 3 things I'd like for us to be able to do tonight, if possible. One is to try to coalesce around one of these processes or an altered version of one of these that would meet, that we have general agreement on moving forward, that we could put into some policy language. And two, we'd like to have a discussion regarding some of those numbers that we have in there, including capacity numbers, what might trigger some action on the administration and the board's part, and both capacity and student composition numbers. So I'd like to talk about those three things over the time period that we have here together, if that works well for the board. Okay. So the first I'd like to talk about is just some of our boundary adjustment process options. Option one is the one that most closely resembles what the district used to do before this last boundary adjustment. The community is involved through two methods. One is through a boundary adjustment committee. The boundary adjustment committee develops options and makes an ultimate recommendation to the board. And the other way the community is involved is through feedback on the community recommendation, through both email and a community forum. The BAC, Boundary Adjustment Committee, does most of the work in developing zone options and the ultimate recommendation. So the process would look like kind of what we used to do. The board would impanel a Boundary Adjustment Committee to develop those options. They would come to you with about 5-year enrollment projections, building capacities, and student composition numbers as a part of their recommendation to the board for new attendance zones. So they would do their work. They would make the recommendation to the board. The board then would take that recommendation and go about the process of receiving feedback relative to the BAC recommendation through email and through at least one community forum. We have in here a draft number of 1. The board would then take the information they receive from community feedback, both online and through the community forum, and process that feedback, make any adjustments the board felt necessary, and adopt new school boundaries. So again, that's most closely what we have done in most of our boundary adjustment processes prior to this last one in 2016. Questions on the first one? Okay. Option two is the most streamlined process, and this one actually puts the most work on the administration, because the administration would develop various zoning options and then come forward to the board with an ultimate recommendation. Community would be involved through feedback on the administration's recommendation through both email and community forums. So the administration would develop the boundary options, including 5-year enrollment projections, building capacity, and student composition numbers. Administration would make a recommendation to the board for those new attendance zones. The board will receive feedback from the community regarding the recommendation through both email and at least 2, perhaps more, community forums. And the board would process the feedback, make any adjustments they feel necessary, and adopt new school boundaries. Questions on the second one? Okay. Option 3 was doing a little bit of lateral thinking and trying to figure out a way to incorporate a community group, a boundary adjustment committee, but later on in the process. And so that's what we have here with number 3. This option involves the community BAC, involves the community through the Boundary Adjustment Committee and through direct feedback with the board. But these processes, as it is described here, would happen simultaneously. So more of the work processing the various options and developing the final zones is done actually at the board level. So in this one, it's a little different because the administration would develop boundary options, including 5-year enrollment projections, capacities, and composition. And the administration, instead of presenting one recommendation, would present to the board options, 2 options, 3 options, okay? Something like that. The board will review the options and provide input on the options to a then impaneled Boundary Adjustment Committee, okay? So the Boundary Adjustment Committee would take that work from the board, study the options, and then would in turn provide feedback back to the board regarding what they were able to work through as a community group. While that is going on, obviously it's a much more public process. It's been done at a regular board meeting. People in the community would have the opportunity to provide feedback through email and in subsequent regular board meetings as the board would work through the various options at the board level over subsequent meetings. The BAC could present their feedback on these options to the board. Kind of don't know exactly what it could look like. It could be a single recommendation on the various options that were presented to them. It could be ranked options. It could be other types of feedback that they could give to the board in this particular scenario. Okay. The board would take the BAC information. The board would take also the feedback that they get from the community through both email and face-to-face presentations to the board, make any necessary adjustments and adopt zones. Questions on 3? And option 4, this one is basically where everything is done at the board level in regular and specially called board meetings. Community input is provided in the public meetings along the way as the board works through the various options. So the administration would develop, again, like in option 3, 2 or 3 boundary options, including the things that we've already talked about. The administration would present the boundary options to the board in a public meeting, and then the board would basically do the work that had been kind of do the various iterations of the options at the board level through subsequent meetings. So they would go through multiple options over the next regular and special board meetings. It would work probably like it used to work with our boundary adjustment committees, where several different, 2 or 3 different options were put up in front of the boundary adjustment committee. They would process the options and would give recommendations on moving lines or neighborhoods to the administration. And then in the week between the meetings, that would come back, administration would make those changes and bring them back to the boundary adjustment committee. I would anticipate this working the same way, that we wouldn't be just moving lines in a meeting like a work group, but it would be 2 or 3 options that the board would look at and say, option A, administration, what if you move this line from here to here? Or what if you move this neighborhood from here to here? Please come back next week at our meeting and present us that information. And we could be having multiple scenarios going at the same time in regards to that. Does that make sense? Okay. And then again, board would receive feedback from the community in email, and then along the way in those various meetings as we go through regular and special board meetings. So what I try to do in this is capture various amounts of administrative input into the process, various amounts of board input into the process, various amounts and ways that the community could have input into the process as a way to really kind of spur discussion. I don't like that we have 4 because it's hard to discuss 4. So I'll leave it up to the board as to how you want to work through this. I would love to hear some conversation about some of the things that we liked, some of the things that we didn't, and maybe start moving forward with that discussion.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Ely, for doing that work. I think that your summary of how much time we have spent on it as a board is important, in that we need to, look at this, and I would ask that we really make some hard decisions. I think that we have had an opportunity to kind of voice some of our concerns over the last 4 months on areas that we wanted to look into more deeply. But we're at a point where, for ourselves and for the community and the administration, I think it's important that we make some headway on this. And so I would ask that, though in the past we've been kind of lenient, and each one of us has taken an opportunity to ensure that it's very clear and in depth on how we feel about things, let's see if we can move the ball a little further down the field, and not that rich conversation's not important, but we're at month 5 already, and we need to see if we're not, couldn't make some progress. And so with that, anybody who would like to, kick us off, that would be great. It's now 10 of 6, and we still have another item that we have to discuss that perhaps might take some time. So let's, keep that in mind as well.
Do you want to go?
Well, I don't know if it's worthwhile. I mean, we had these, so we had the opportunity to look at them, and was essentially asked to come to the meeting with an opinion. My opinion, I think, as I've made clear in prior meetings and immediately following our last process, is that I think we've moved past, in my mind, having a boundary adjustment committee made up of 40 people from around the city, from disparate places. I understand people wanting to have a say. to me, I look at this and option 4 stands out as the best option. I think it's transparent in terms of the discussion that is made around whatever decision that we come to. Having sat through that last boundary adjustment committee meetings and having been through that before when the 2 high schools were created, being on that committee, everything I know about decision making in groups tells me putting 40 people together and asking them to come up with a decision is wrong. So I want this to be as transparent as possible, to have as much community input as we can through the process. But I think what we ran into this last time was we assigned it to a committee, and then we came back and had all the exact conversations that committee had already had. And we're going to have that information to make a decision. So to me, it's like you're going through the process 2 or 3 times. You just don't need to do that. So I would like to see some combination of personal opinion 2 and 4, perhaps with a slightly stronger recommendation from the administration on what they think is a good solution, for us to then have a very detailed conversation about what their recommendation is, and perhaps other options. We finalize a recommendation. It goes out, right, and it'll be out in the whole discussion's out in the open for everybody to hear. It then goes out to the community. We collect feedback through email and multiple sessions, and then we come back and we make a decision.
Yeah.
I just think we need to have a healthy conversation about that after the board presents its recommendation. I mean, after the administration presents its recommendations. I think the notion that we don't really have a say on things in between them and the public having a feedback discussion, I think, is rife for problems.
Let me jump in there because there's something in these options. I mean, there's something that's pretty fundamental to me. And it's the idea that we get a single recommendation. As I boiled down some of my thoughts on this, that's what troubles me a lot about the process we had. And that I found that to be problematic because it's almost as if I'm somehow bound by that. And quite frankly, in this last process, with absolutely no knowledge or understanding about how it came about, what options were looked at, what are the issues involved if you push one place and pull another. I mean, I found that very troubling. So I'm in agreement with the fact that I think the board needs to have a more active role. I personally would like to see the board receive recommendations or options, but not a recommendation or an option. And as I look at these, whether you combine certain elements, I think the boundary adjustment committee can be helpful, but I think it clearly in this last time it highlighted something for me, and I don't know who I articulated it to at some point in the last months, but it was something along these lines that the committee seemed to work great. Now, again, this is coming from someone who wasn't there, so those of you who were, correct me. It seemed to work great when you were spotting issues and identifying things that we think are important. But when you actually started having lines drawn and people didn't like the impact on their particular situation is when you started dividing into camps, and it seemed from the outside looking in like the process broke down and it degenerated into I'm fighting for my side and my issue and they're fighting for their side and their issue. Sounds familiar, right? And we didn't actually get to the heart of the issue of how do we solve the problems on the page. And I highlighted some of those that I had earlier. But it seems to me that if we can figure out a way where we can condense the issues and what are they, it seems like every time it comes down to we have a small number of options that seem to make sense. And if we push somewhere, well, it causes this to pop up and we have to deal with that. But it lets us focus on a handful of things instead of just a free-for-all of all the issues. And I think that would be good if we can get it to that point, whether it's administration or boundary adjustment committee, a committee of the board, some combination of those. But so that then when we go to what I'll call the more engaged process where the whole board with Dr. Ely are going through it, we've condensed it down somewhat, but not to a single point where then we hold up a straw man and everybody throws darts at it and we make everybody mad, including ourselves and the administration. Anyway, that's some of my thoughts on the single recommendation.
Can I jump in here? I wasn't planning on it, but I'd like to address option number 2. A bullet that was not put in here, but a healthy discussion that the administration had at our meeting this morning in regards to this. Just kind of pull back a curtain a little bit about how we go about our work in developing a recommendation. We pore over this for weeks at a time and look at various scenarios, and we do the numbers and we pull all that out. And Chuck actually kept them this last year and numbered them and just kind of kept them in a file of here's what we tried, here's what we tried, here's what we tried. And I'll be honest with you, the first thing we usually try, we try to draw one line down the middle and see what happens. Sometimes we draw a line this way just to see what happens, because that's usually the first question that we get. So we try that and we see what it looks like. What I think we would like to add, I didn't add because I didn't send it to you this weekend, would be between this first one and the second bullet, that in the process of making the recommendation to the board, it would be a lengthy, probably on the order of 30, 45-minute presentation about how the administration developed their recommendation. Here's what we tried first. We put a line down Rock Prairie Road, and here's what happened. Here's what we tried second. Now, that wouldn't contemplate, we can't think of every scenario, even though we spend weeks and sometimes up to a month or two working through the various options. We wouldn't know what if we pulled one particular neighborhood, what would happen. But many of the things, questions that maybe perhaps the board or many in the community might ask, did you try that? We could say, here's what we tried that looked something like that, and here's what it looked like. So we would have a kind of a menu of things that have been tried that I think would be informative to the board and the community. I wouldn't want it to be 12 options that we're choosing from, but it could help the board kind of track the evolution of our thinking and how we ultimately, under the scenario in option 2, arrived at that single recommendation.
I was liking option 3. I think that was my favorite option. I think the concerns I have on option 3 would be I do think that there should be some type of committee. I think the experts in this would be the administration. And then if the committee was made up of, like you did this last time, of people that are representing each of the different schools, so we can see the needs of those individual schools. On option 3, I think the one thing I did not like is there was no type of forum. I think there needs to be, more than one forum. So I don't recall that one having any type of forum as for feedback. I think it's email and then regular board meetings. I think I would have a problem with the regular board meetings, just if there's a thing. I mean, that regular board meeting could go on all night long. So I think it would be 1 or 2 forums.
So the forums were not put in options 3 and 4 because those are more iterative processes at the board level. Because in both processes, you're receiving various options that you're working through over successive meetings. So in thinking of a forum scenario, it's pretty static of where they are in that time. And this would give, during the regular and special called meetings, would give the folks the time to continue to provide feedback as the various options evolve. So that's certainly something, if it's the will of the board to put back in community forums in any of these, we can certainly look at.
Either community forum or a special meeting to present to the public the options.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would agree, not with option three, but I would agree wholeheartedly with the fact that at some point, once we have a firm, here's what we think we should do, or a final recommendation, that we have open forums, and we have at least two so that they're at different times, so that members, people who can't make one can potentially make the other. I mean, I just think we have to do that. I mean, I think at some point, you got to announce and say, here's our proposed deal, and then get that feedback after the fact and have a chance to go back, right, after that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we also need to keep in mind that we have the flexibility, since we're drafting the policy, to build in options. Like, you have the options, or the option to have a community forum at any point in the process. And we can put that in our policy if we so choose, to say, on the front end, let's hear what people think. Let's have a forum and see what's important to them as we're rezoning for the next one coming up, I guess, is for elementary schools. Well, we would have that flexibility, or if we chose not to, because we've had some recently and we feel like we have a good idea of what the issues are, well, we don't have to do it. But I do think, I can't imagine a scenario where I wouldn't want feedback after we have a final decision, if we haven't already gotten significant impact or input, where we would want to send it out and say, okay, tell us what you think. But still, I mean, I think we can structure it as an option to do that if we want at any point.
I think one last thing is on the thing on 3 that I liked is the board impanels the BAC to study the options and provide feedback. I think that's a good way to make sure, again, I think the administration is one of our key experts in this, but also I think it would make me feel better if that boundary adjustment committee be represented of almost everybody at that point. If we have the forums and somebody from a particular school doesn't come, we can't control that. But if we know that we're having at least somebody from that school come, I think that puts a lot more validity to me for that committee to make sure that we've heard all the voices.
Yeah, just my 2 cents real quick. I also thought we had moved past option 1. And I was naturally drawn to number 2 and 4. I thought they were very similar. The one thing I agree with Mr. Schaefer that bothered me in hearing you clarify, Dr. Ely, it makes sense as far as the process being board meetings and open meetings. But the lack of a forum was a little concerning to me on option 4. As Dr. Wesson shared, that's something that I think is important. Now, if those special meetings were going to be, I guess, crafted in such a way that we could have the feedback that we would at a forum, I mean, I think we could talk about that. But I do believe hearing back from them is important. And while I was not a fan of option 3, it made me go back about, gosh, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months. When we had our discussion about where this whole idea was born, and it was kind of a semantic argument we were having about whether we shall have a committee or we may. And I was just a little, and I think at the time I was falling down, and I probably still am, that there may be a year or so that comes up where, this is something that a committee could handle. I don't know what that might be, but it gave us the option to do it. Am I misremembering that night?
No, you're not.
I'm not, okay.
I think the argument wasn't whether you shall or you may, it was whether you will not or you may.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's probably a little bit more accurate.
That was, yeah.
Okay.
The may was essentially leaving us an option to create a
Right.
committee at any given point.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the option, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on right now, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've accurately stated it there. That was it. And to me, I like the idea of an option, because I can see if we have something in the process you described with the administration, it's not that dissimilar from the process the Boundary Adjustment Committee goes through. The question then becomes, well, just who's doing it? Whether it's the administration or the Boundary Adjustment Committee. And I think as I look at some of the critiques of the processes in the past, the who's doing it, and whether it's behind closed doors or out in the open, matters a great deal. And I think the more flexibility we have, the better. The administration might say, for this particular issue, we would really like to be able to go get, I don't know, you pick the number, 8 people from the community and bring them in. We know who they are. We know what their roles in the school and their involvement is. And let's hear what they think about what we're dealing with. I mean, it would be nice for you, I think, in board policy to have that flexibility, just like we might want it. As the board, I gravitate to option 4 as well. As the board's working through it, we might want at some committee like that. I mean, this last time, I mean, we would clearly want to hear from Indian Lakes, Nantucket. Who else did we hear from? A lot. But those people, I mean, they're because they're affected. Ninth graders, right. Anybody with a ninth grader. Right. You know, I mean, so those things can be very helpful if you have a group that's impacted, or, you know, if it's a more global issue, it might be nice. I can't believe I'm going to say it, to have a 40-member committee, but it could be, and that's why I'm in favor of having flexibility. Now we can word it in such a way that it looks more like option 4, and then put an asterisk at the bottom. However, the board or administration may make use of community input through forums or committees as deemed appropriate, period. But something like that, that's what I do. Thoughts?
What wasn't an exclamation point? That's what
No. It's not something worth falling on a sword over.
I'm gravitating towards option 4. I did wonder about a forum type environment. While those are sometimes painful, I do think we can learn from that. It's painful not because of what we're hearing, but because we can't respond, and that's not anything that we can fix. But it's difficult sometimes when there's an assumption made that we're doing something a certain way because of whatever, and we can't respond to that either in a positive or like we're not doing it. But I think that it is important to hear, because I do think we learn a great deal. You know, I think it became the obvious became that ninth grade issue, and it did, and I don't think, the committee worked really hard, and it just, like you said, the administration can bring stuff, and then you look at it and there's something you might miss, and it's good to have that input to just say, oh, like, duh, kind of thing. I do like what you said about putting how it was developed. I think that's an important point, because I think when the community looks at it and it behind closed doors or in front, or I want to know how you came about that. I personally like to have that information. How did this develop, and did we think about it? Because sometimes I think we ask a lot of questions you've already thought through, and it makes total sense for you to say, we've already thought through X, Y, and Z before we start our discussion, and just reinvent the wheel. Is sometimes how I feel in these processes with the, that's how I felt even about, although we really didn't, I don't feel good about that we didn't talk more, but that I'd really like to know how the Boundary Adjustment Committee came up with some of those things too, because there were some things that they discussed that we weren't privy to, some of us, and then I think we offended people because we asked some questions because we weren't part of the process, and it became that's hard too. So I'm with 4, with the idea that we could have a forum, and that you say how in that bullet how you came up with that. Because that was in 2, right, that you put that bullet
Yeah,
point?
we did, but it's, yes.
It could be appropriate for 4 as well.
It could be, and, you know, just the administration probably wouldn't do as detailed a work that we could kind of take you down the road. This is how we developed the 2 options or the 3 options that you see before you.
Okay, so why does that have to be different between 2 and 4? Like,
Well, if we were gonna give, one option, we'd want to definitely take everybody down, be very specific about some of the different things that we considered all along the way. When you develop options that are kind of given to the board for the board to start developing, those are a little bit more starting places than say the final recommendation and that's
I see.
contemplated into. Does that make sense?
yeah, yes, I understand that.
But we could still do the same thing. Hey, we wanted to look, hey, north-south line, east-west line, we wanted to look at.
Well, let me clarify one thing. In option 4, I mean, you're not contemplating options like that, like a straight line across. I mean, these are reasonable options.
They would be reasonable options, correct. We wouldn't say.
You know what I'm getting at. Here's a blank page. Nobody goes to school. That's an option.
No, sir.
Okay.
So when I looked at it prior to having this conversation, I was leaning towards option 2 with the idea that there needed to be some method for perhaps having a forum added to it. When I talked to Quinn, he also told me that option 2 was some kind of ability to get input from the community was important. When I look at the difference between 2 and 4, I guess I understand based on what we were given the focus on option 4, but what I heard Dr. Ely say with adding a bullet on option 2 of the lengthy, what did we look at? What are the kind of things? I think it would be, for me, I think it would be important to have them make a recommendation to us and then let us kind of go from there.
So I think that's the key.
Versus-
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, so that key, adding that bullet in there of saying, here's the things that we look at. And the reason that I say that is having had an opportunity to sit on several of these committees and go through this as a parent, as a member of the community, as a member on one of the committees, and then as a board member, I have full confidence that the administration has the pulse of what's best for education of our students. And I think that they will work through those scenarios and bring those to us. What I saw having an opportunity to be one of the people who listened to the 40-member committee is that though in theory should be all voices, it becomes he who can speak the loudest in a lot of cases. It becomes, yes, we are, as Mr. Harris identified, we identify the issues, but then when we have to vote, it loses some of its focus on education of students. It becomes very much how does it impact me, not how does it impact education of students. And while I think there's some benefit to having the ability to have a committee if we want to, and I agree with the statements that have been made that we should be able to have a committee. I think it's important because there are going to be issues going forward. The one that comes to mind is what are we going to do when we have to open the 3rd high school? How are we going to deal? How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to be able to maintain them at the same UA? I think we're going to have some community input for that. But I do think that the administration and the board should take the brunt of the conversation and focus on education and having a method to get community input. And so I like to, in that we allow the administration to come with a recommendation and then we can push and pull versus us pushing and pulling and having the option 4 seems like perhaps is not as effective way to use our time, where I would like to see the administration explain to us why they made the recommendation, and then we can push and pull a little bit on it when they tell us these are the kind of issues, and if we want to get feedback on what other kind of issues we need to look at. But I feel like they know what they need to do to effectively and efficiently educate and move children within the district.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with that. But I will tell you, I disagree with it. And it's part because I know what I need to do to effectively cast the vote that I'm being asked to cast. I feel like I have to know and understand what those issues are. And I can tell you, after living through a few of these events, I feel like I'm going on some kind of scavenger hunt trying to find out what the issues are and how it works with the maps. And that's what I end up with when I have a single recommendation. And
Well, I guess I hear what you're saying, and that's why I said at the beginning, I felt like when they added the other piece of what were the renditions that they went to come to a recommendation, I felt like that provided us more of that granularity, if you will, of information on what the issues are. Because sitting through the Boundary Adjustment Committee meetings, there was nothing that came up that I saw a look on any of the administration's faces that, oh my gosh, we never thought about that. So I do think they will have addressed that when they have that discussion with us. And if one of them perhaps seems more important or volatile that we need to discuss, then they'll already have that work done. I guess that's my thought is if we allow them to already do a lot of the work and they say, okay, when we do the line this way, it looks like this. And when we do the line this way, it looks like that. Then we have more time to actually have the hard conversation at the end. What happens if we draw it out and we say, okay, here's our criteria, what I'm reading in option 4, we spend a lot of time on the pushing and pulling and not as much time on the evaluating what happens with the pushing and pulling. And so to me, when they say, we're going to give you the presentation of this happens, and when we move this line, it does this, and when we move this line, it does that, and when we did all this pushing and pulling, this is where we came at the end. I feel like then that provides us the time with the community or however we want to go forward to focus on more the results and the actual concerns. Whereas option 4, as I interpret it, we spend a lot of time getting ready to get ready, and then we find ourselves not having as much time to discuss at the end.
to some extent, I think we're fighting over semantics and what we call it. I mean, they use the phrase "an ultimate recommendation." You know, that has a
It
looming
doesn't-
context for me.
It doesn't, where does it say ultimate?
I saw what you did there.
The thing I really don't want to get into the business of doing is undermining the administration or being perceived as undermining the administration. The reality is there are times when the board sees things differently because of where we sit between, in essence, the community and the administration. And it's a different perspective. And sometimes things might be, we might weigh a close call a little differently than the administration does. And I don't know what harm it would cause if the administration brings in, say, the top 3 proposals they came up with, tells us these are the issues, and if they rank them 1, 2, 3, I guess I'd be okay with that. But, you know, with the understanding that, well, you know what, we may very well go with 2, and we may end up with 3. I mean, unless they tell us if they feel very strongly about one, I hope they articulate that to us and why. But I don't want to be put in the position where we feel like we had a group behind closed doors who went through the issues, weighed various things without me knowing about it. And then I'm left with, well, do I just take that and hope that they did it the way this board would do it, knowing what we know about the community and the schools.
I agree with what you're saying there, but when I hear that he's gonna explain to us, we looked at this, we looked at that, he's not just gonna come give us one map and say, okay, vote yes or no.
And I think that's the reason I can't,
Versus, when I read number 4, I just see a lot of the.
You picture us as the BAC.
Yeah, and I just don't think that, I don't think that that's a good use of the community attention to it, because what happens is we spend so much time on that we don't then perhaps spend as much time on the discussion at the end.
I think that's why I cannot support 4. I just don't feel like that. I think we just, again, probably on 2 with the forums and me knowing that the administration is, if it's not a committee, that they're at least listening to somebody from the 10 elementary schools and some other schools. I mean, my thing is, I was sitting in a room and not knowing that everybody's represented, and then the perception that we're making the decision of option 4. I just have a hard time with that.
Can I maybe sum up a little bit of kind of where I'm hearing? I'm hearing some.
One didn't get any votes, we heard that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard one. That's good. What I'm hearing is that that to a person, you believe that when we get to a near final recommendation from the board level, we need to have probably a community forum or 2. Perhaps 2, to be able to let everybody say, okay, this is what's going forward. Now these are the lines. Give us feedback on that. So I'm hearing that. I'm also hearing flexibility built in to the board policy that would allow a boundary adjustment committee to be impaneled at the board's discretion when we feel we need to, based on the various rezonings. So those things feel like they are, everybody is in agreement on that. And I believe while we haven't talked about it at this particular time, I know before, it would be changing a lot more of the language from shalls to mays and providing a little bit more flexibility in regards to that. So what it kind of gets down to, in my estimation, is the amount of work that, or how the board will go about its work. And if you allow me a couple of observations. Dr. Weston talked a little bit about this in 2010, the original rezoning when we split A&M consolidated into the 2 comprehensive high schools, and then in 2016 when we moved the high school lines. There's a very big need on the part of the trustees to be able to process the information and have all of your questions asked and be able to be answered, so that the community would know that the board had adequately wrestled with the topic, and many of the things that you've been communicated with were asked and got on the record. So in a sense, the board did wrestle with many of the things that had already been wrestled with the Boundary Adjustment Committee. So it seems like when we go through those high school rezonings, the ones that are the most contentious for the community, there will be a need for the board, whoever is sitting in these chairs at that time, to have more hands-on work through that. So it kind of gets down to, do you want to pick apart one fairly well developed by the administration recommendation and pick that apart, or do more of the work of the Boundary Adjustment Committee type work, which is the various iterations of 2 or 3 options, working that through? And I think that's the kind of the last hurdle that we're at. Am I summarizing that fairly well, what the group's thinking?
Yes.
I think you did a great job.
And I can see pros and cons to either one. And from an administrative point of view, either one would be fine with us. It's just really, what does the board think is the best, most best way as a group of as a team of 8 we can work through in the most transparent way that our community would have faith in the process.
I hear what you're saying, and so I think what we just need is we need to meet halfway and kind of in between the language of option 2 and option 4. That I guess if I had to lay in here, I would say I would like to see a number one choice from the administration, but here was our second and third option, and these are the issues around having chose these other options, and this is why we didn't choose them. And this is why we went with this. And that will bring out to us the issues that you were wrestling with, where you saw the hardest decisions, how you arrived at those options. I hear Jeff when Mr. Harris, sorry, when he says, I think it's harder for us to have an overall discussion of the issues when we're laid one option in front of us, because then we feel like all we're doing is throwing darts at something that you've worked really hard to come up with. And none of us wants to do that. And but I also don't want us to feel a pressure that we need to adopt the administration's recommendation without having a full say-so on full discussion of the whole thing. So perhaps kind of a mix of those two would be, if you're asking us to vote and give you a recommendation, here it is. Here were our other two or three. We leave it up to you as to how many you came up with. But I think what we don't want is a straw man. But what we also don't want is 8 options, to say, hey, which of these 8 do you like the best? Which I think is what Valerie's trying to get away from in terms of what the BAC ends up with at some point. It's like, okay, each board member come up with your own thing, and then let's put them up on the wall and discuss them all.
Yeah.
I think that's a worthwhile proposition. Not a worthwhile proposition for all of us to go through that too. So
I think that you made a great point, and if we're wrestling with it here, and I think it needs to be clear to the administration I think I picked option 4 simply because I thought it gave us some responsibility, so we weren't picking at the administration, and that the community didn't feel like, well, the administration said this, and even if we agreed, it gives a perception that we just did what y'all said, and I didn't want that to be the perception. So I hear what you're saying. If we could find something that is.
What about the calendar process? I know, can you believe I just said that?
Did you just bring that up?
Good.
No, but really, look at it. If we're given, I know,
It's like, why would anybody want to go through that?
certain elements of it where they come up with, again, I don't know what the number is. I think it depends. Let's say the top 3 options that they have. If the administration, when they're under option 4, presenting that, feels very strongly that, you know what, the green option here is the one we really want. Here's why. Well, you know what? That's going to influence the board significantly. But what I don't want the dynamic to be is one option, go pick it apart. Give us multiple options. If the administration has a preference, tell us which one and why. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the other 2? Just like we did with calendars.
Yep.
And then we go to work. But you're right. I don't want us to sit down and start going through from ground zero
No,
like
I
the
think
Boundary
that-
Adjustment Committee
Well, even
does.
the options that you provide in 2 that you were talking about, here's why we didn't do that. I think that satisfies, when you added that bullet, that almost satisfies what we're talking about, is that I know, you're going to tell me no, but
An
wait.
ultimate recommendation.
Does it say ultimate?
Okay, so I would
Say
take
that.
the word ultimate out for sure.
All right.
Where is it?
Option 2, second line, 5th word.
Okay.
Well, either that, or if you want, you can tweak item 4.
That was just kind of a description. I didn't
Well,
think that was part of it.
I read the process part,
Yeah, I
but
did too.
Mr. Harris
The-
lined that
Read the
one.
whole thing, sorry.
No, you did. Read it. I just.
So perhaps would it be the board's will that we ask the administration to go back to option 2, take out ultimate, go back and include that the administration will make a recommendation for new attendance zones with at least two, but not more than four, so it could be two or three, option, suggest, with an ultimate, but between 2 and 4
But don't use that.
scenarios. Yeah,
Don't use looming.
and that we may, don't use looming, and that, there,
Optimal sufficient granularity.
yeah, exactly.
So,
This is really good.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
It may, and that the board may decide that there is a need to,
we can add back in the option to have a boundary adjust committee,
what about,
add back in the community forums. Seems like though you guys were coalescing more around 4.
yeah,
Two.
it's easier to tweak 4 and say if the board has if the administration has a preference among the options presented,
To rank them or something.
to rank
well,
them.
that's, I just want to be sure that they're doing all the work and we're just, looking at it.
Well, yeah.
I don't want to be a boundary adjustment committee.
Again,
No, well, it's just, we lose
you're right.
they are in the business of educating students.
Totally agree with
We're in the business of looking to see whether or not it seems like it's educating students properly. And I just want to be sure that we realize where we stand on that side of the line.
I agree with everything you've said. I would add to our job of making sure our community buys into what we and the administration are doing in that regard.
I agree.
I think I have a good understanding of what the process could look like. Would love to be able to bring that back to us for the next meeting. Do you have a couple other options that we do want to talk about? That's okay?
On these?
On
No,
this?
not on these, sorry, about the next two things we want to talk about in regards to the percentages that we had in there.
Okay.
Okay, so two of the things that are important with our annual review that's a part of the draft policy FC local would be reviewing our 5-year enrollment projections and looking at what would define whether a campus is overutilized or underutilized. The data that we put, the numbers that we put in the draft policy that we've not talked about yet as a group is saying that a campus would be overutilized if it got to 115% of its capacity, be underutilized if it was at 85% of its capacity. Just recall it for everybody's recollection too. That doesn't signify anything other than the board administration would begin to look at options to address overutilization and underutilization. Doesn't mean we would rezone or build a school or consolidate schools necessarily, but it would be the trigger point to start that discussion. So just would love to hear anybody's feedback or thoughts on 85% and 115% as good numbers.
So personally, I think it needs to go down to 10% plus or minus. That it needs to be between 90 and 110 because we have to, because it does not trigger an action. I think it's important that the board be aware that we have a situation within that 10%, because we're talking for an elementary, that's 65 students. That's 3 classrooms. I think that we need to look at it at plus or minus 10% of capacity.
Okay, let me make sure I understand. So we're not saying, let me state that differently. What we are saying is that this triggers the raising of the issue to the board level about a capacity concern.
Yes.
It does not trigger action.
Correct.
Because that's where I have.
It doesn't state what the action could be. It triggers the action that the board would review it.
Right. And that's very important to me because there are different contexts where I was struggling with this. In some, 85 or 115 are fine, or 90, 110 are fine, but in others they may not be. And let me give you an example. And it's whether let's say it's moving students around among existing schools because we have crowding at one. Well, I may have a different view of that than if we determine that 85% is utilization. If we have 85% utilization at all of our schools and we're trying to use all of our elementaries and then to go and ask for a bond for a new elementary, well, I'd say, well, wait a minute. I start counting up students. We have more than a 4 full schools worth not used. Do you see, am I articulating that? In some rationales, it makes sense, whereas others, it doesn't. That's the concern I have with if we had triggered some action with that number.
And we're not. As it's contemplated right now, it does not trigger an action.
Yeah, because I mean, I have an entirely different view of the thresholds if we're talking about asking for a bond. And I mean, that's just, it's hard for me to ask voters to pass a bond when I'm at 90% in schools
Okay, so,
or 85.
okay, thank you. Okay, so, but being that what Dr. Lee is asking is, what is the percentage variance that we feel like it is important to bring it to the board's attention of over or under utilization of a school building? What is that number? What is your,
So I'll just say we looked at a number of policies, FC local policy, and one of the other districts that does this use that 120% as their overutilization number. Felt that was a little too high, and we went back and actually applied the numbers to our schools, and we looked at them, and 115 kind of made a little bit more sense to us. That would put basically one elementary school at overcapacity. This year it's College Hills, and we know the situation with College Hills with 774 students. 115% for them is 759, and that's kind of about, that felt right. And also, as we looked at our other largest school, which was Greens Prairie, they were at 730 kids in April, and their number would be 759 also at 115%. And they are over capacity, but they are not bursting at the seams. So that kind of felt right to us.
Yeah, what about on the lower
On
end?
the lower end, if you look at the school with the lowest number of kids for us right now, and on April the 18th, Pebble Creek had 420 kids. 85% of the capacity at Pebble Creek is 527. So that does show they're about 100 students or so, 93 students below that 85% number. So what that kind of shows me, just we've got a few too many kids are overutilized at College Hills and underutilized at Pebble Creek. And the other ones are within their tolerances. Some are at the higher end, but are not having the effect of all the kids that we're having right now at College Hills.
So the 90 and 110 would just bring it to our attention before it got.
it would just come,
It would generate a discussion.
And I think that discussion for us is, using the College Hills and Pebble Creek example, do we cap enrollment? Do we, look at transfers? Do we change one line to move kids? Do we, those are the things that we could do, those are, I think, the types of decisions we would be, making or contemplating as a team looking at in this type of scenario.
does anybody have anything else, any other suggestions or numbers that they'd like to put forward? And not that I'm trying to rush this, but we do have one more item that I think we need to address.
I think 10 or 15 is fine. I don't mind a lower number. I mean, I don't mind 90, 110. If all it's going to do is make us stand up, especially in January, and say, hey, this is something we need to keep an eye on. I mean, I think if you go with 10%, I think that's fine.
Well, then I think it's very important that our wording reflect that's what the intent is, because I seem to have a recollection the language didn't quite say that. It said something else about effective utilization, and that's not what we're saying is if the range falls outside of these brackets, we're going to be made aware of it. Is that right?
And we know a rezoning is coming up next year.
Right, so it doesn't, so what I heard Dr. Ely say is the administration would bring it to the board's attention. It does not require an action, but it does not prohibit us from taking an action if that seemed reasonable based on the situation.
And there's a couple of different types of solutions to that. Some are minimally invasive, and they would be like capping enrollment or, moving, transferring some kids, those types of things. And the more invasive would be the ones of building a new building or going through rezoning. And those obviously take tremendous amount of board action to do those. So there's kind of a menu there of
Right.
options.
And any other comments on this?
And the other one was the discrepancy between percent low SES at the secondary schools. And the recommendation was 15 percentage points in the first draft. I know a number of other numbers have been thrown out since that time.
I'm very comfortable with 15%. So
I'm more comfortable with a larger number of the variants than I am kiddos being put into the overcapacity of a school. So I'm okay with the 15% variance in the difference of SES.
Okay, what are we talking about here? What does this number mean? Does it trigger action?
It's the percentage points difference between percent low
No,
SES.
the question is,
And what does it trigger?
is it, yeah.
It would be the same thing. It would be bringing this to the board and administration's attention. And the same things that are available for overcapacity and undercapacity could be available in this particular area. Primarily, though, when we'd be talking about moving kids around, and a boundary adjustment would be one way to address that. And it wouldn't trigger that necessarily, but it would start the conversation regarding it.
Again, it would just make the board aware.
Okay, if that's the case, then I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think 15 is probably too high, just based on our past experience with the differences that have existed and the issues that those caused in our community. I can't remember what all the exact timing was, but I do know that we've had that issue come up when the issue has been at or below that range.
Well, I think that we have to take into account in the past, we've coupled the overcapacity and the variance in
Percent low SES.
SES at the same time, and now we're decoupling them and saying that we're going to be made aware of overcapacity or a variance separately. So not to discourage you from feeling that there should be a lower number, but I do think that what we are trying to address here is looking at the situation two separate times. So, for instance, it may be that the variance between the two schools of the same level of low SES is higher, but both schools are under capacity. And then, do we want to bring that to our attention? Are we going to focus on capacity first, or not that we're not, both are very important, but what would be the trigger points?
the plan, if I'm not misreading, the plan is in January, every January from here on out, you're going to break all this down for us.
Correct.
And it's all going to be laid out, regardless of whether we have plans to do boundaries or plans to do whatever. All that information is going to be presented right? So to me, I think it might be worth putting in policy that that's the point at which we feel a board should be concerned about those differences. But the truth is, in January, if that split is 7%, we can still have a conversation about it when they present it, right? We're given full information now every year on these issues.
It's what's the definition of disparate or not comparable?
Right.
What's the definition of overutilized or underutilized? It's kind of what we're trying to put in there, so we can kind of know what that is.
Yeah, no,
forward.
you said that, and that's different than what we talked about with the capacity percentages. Because what you're doing is defining what's overutilized or underutilized or what is adequately utilized. That's different than making the board aware of a potential utilization issue when they hit certain points. What that is, that's a value judgment on a certain percentage usage. That's where I had angst with, well, it depends on the particular situation. I mean, if we have a school that has a core capacity that's built significantly larger than its classroom space, it's going to be a different issue than if we have an old school with old facilities on a very small tract without much infrastructure. So that's a big distinction.
Okay.
And that's what I'm wondering. Are we doing that here? Are we raising the issue, or are we making a value judgment on what comparable composition means? Because if we're making a value judgment on comparable composition, it's not the same to me at an intermediate and middle school than a high school based on what we've seen.
I would agree with that.
So I think we need to give that a little bit more thought. And one of the other things that that occurred to me is, we don't have to have a hard and fast number. We can have ranges. We could have, I'm going to use it again, something like colors of the calendar. We've got, okay, if the difference is below X, it's fine. We're going to deem that comparable. If it's between X and Y, well, we're starting to get there. We might see some issues. We might need to look at differential staffing or whatever the administration and maybe board chooses. And then if we're above Y, well, then we can figure out, what do we do? Does that then trigger the need to adjust composition of the school or make some more major programmatic shift? But at a minimum, if we're going to start making value judgments, we need to start being a little more precise, in my opinion.
I would agree with your assumption or your assertion that the percentage at high school is a little different than grades 5 through 8. And with grades 5 through 8, we have 3 schools now. So I think a 15 percentage point among 3 schools is probably adequate. But perhaps 12 percentage points between 2 comprehensive high schools is more hitting the mark. And whether we want to talk about a 10 to 12% range or 12 to 15 or 10 to 15 or something, and I'm certainly we can entertain ranges. But I do believe Mr. Harris has a good point. It feels a little different at the high school level. Probably needs to be a little tighter.
Maybe we say less than 10. All right, if we're going to put, I don't want to put colors on it, but whatever. Less than 10 is less than 10 is green, 10 to 20 is yellow, and above 20% is red. I'm just throwing out numbers, right? Just to kind of give us it's an area of concern when we're in a yellow zone, and we would consider it not comparable at over 20%.
Yeah, I'd make that lower, but yeah.
Okay, so based on what you've heard, then perhaps you can come back with actual
Some language?
some language, and then we can look at that. Would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
No, I think we've made some good progress today.
okay, good. Dr. Lee, do you think we're going to have time for the next one, or do you want to go ahead and?
We've got some.
We're going to go ahead and do C3, but we're going to stop at 10 of 7.
One thing before we leave that one. There were 2 items that I still were struggling with on that. Have we addressed, I don't think that we, in my opinion, emphasized enough. I know it was mentioned there about distance between schools. I think there's a couple of things that I heard loud and clear through this last process was the distance to the schools. I think it was very important to me. And the other thing I think that really got my attention was an individual talked about how many times somebody in their family got rezoned. I mean, and I call it a pocket neighborhood. It might have been one of those neighborhoods where that was an easy one to switch. Mm-hmm. I think those are the 2 things that I still am struggling with.
Well, I appreciate you giving that insight, and I think that what I would recommend at this point in time, just because where we're at on time, is that perhaps we go back and we get the language next month, and that we can look at that, and those may be things that we want to keep in mind. I'm not sure we can then put hardcore in policy numbers, but perhaps we can look at where we're at, and write yourself a note, and we can bring that up next month when we have the actual document in front of us. Would that be all right?
Thank you.
So we're going to go on to C3, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to policy GKD local concerning non-school use of district facilities. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin. At the last April board meeting, we had a few representatives from the Drama Kids organization come and present during the audience participation section of the regular board meeting regarding the availability of schools facilities directly after school for the purposes of use of the Drama Kids program. We've had a board member ask that this be put back on the agenda for us to be able to talk about. And this falls under the board policy GKD local, which governs non-school use of school facilities. If you don't mind, passing on to everybody. GKD local covers a number of areas. As this is coming around, I've highlighted those in here for you. Under scope of use, let's see, the district shall permit non-school use of designated district facilities for educational, recreational, civic, or social activities when these activities do not conflict with school use or with this policy. So this does allow us to be able to do that. When you scroll down to for-profit use, the district shall permit individuals and for-profit organizations to use its facilities for financial gain, again, when these activities do not conflict with school use or with this policy. So I think that's what is being contemplated here. And then when you move over to page 3 of that, under fees for use, non-school users shall be charged a fee for the use of designated school district facilities. The executive director for facilities shall establish and publish a schedule of fees based on the cost of the physical operation of the facilities, as well as the applicable personnel costs for supervision, custodial, food service, security, technology, and so forth. So those are some of the things that are contemplated here in policy. Also at issue was the administrative guideline that has guided us, and I checked on this just today, at least since 1996, that we do not allow folks to come in and use our facilities in the period directly after school from 3 o'clock or 3:45 until about 6 o'clock when Kids Club is finished on the campus. Because the Kids Club is what used to be a jointly run program between the City of College Station and the school district, now totally run by the school district. That uses a large part of our facility. Also, we like to keep classroom space open for teachers to be able to work in their classrooms, tutor students, be able to plan for the next days of instruction. So that is something that has been in place, not at the policy level, but has been an administrative practice since at least the mid-90s. GKD local was changed pretty significantly back in 2010. I think that question was asked. It's been a policy that we've had in this district for a number of years, but most of what you see here was put in place in 2010. It was tweaked earlier this last year when we went through our policy audit. So no real substantive changes were made at that time. So that's basically what we have before us. Would love anybody on the board who wishes to address the issue. I'd love to answer any questions or provide any more clarification for the board. At your pleasure.
I was very impressed with the program. I think the district does a very good job with kids that are at risk, and I think we do a very good job with offering courses and programs for kids at the top. I was very intrigued with the program, saw some good merit to it. Other districts do it. I guess my thing is if the policy was changed in 2010, what was it security, maintenance, were they tearing stuff up? What was the reason that the district would not?
So we've really never allowed anybody at that time period. What we tried to do in 2010 was get a better handle on how our facilities were using. We were growing. We had, quite frankly, folks with athletics at our high schools wanting to use it for certain reasons, for practice, for non-school teams coming up there. We had We had kids club, we had other people who'd been approaching us about using our facilities. So we really needed athletics and community education at that time, and facilities, which was maintenance operations at that time, to really all be on the same page. To say which facilities are up for use, which ones are not. So a competition gym at the high school, yes or no, or a competition gym at a middle school, which can be used. And then how are we going to charge people for this? What if they're in the community? What if they're related to a school? What if they're for profit? What if they're wanting to do lessons? What will, kind of what will control all that? So we went through a significant amount of work to try to determine the various different classes of users, meaning the fee structures associated with that, and which facilities we would make available. So that was kind of the need for doing that.
So if this would be if the board decided that they want to do a pilot thing, what would the administration's concerns be?
Administration's concerns would be we've been approached by a number of different folks wanting to use this. We had a Lego Creative Group pretty recently. We've had athletics, different training activities wanting to use our facilities, dance lessons, art programs. Obviously, we have this program that was wanting this access. It would put us in the place of one, of picking winners or losers, who would be able to have this access, and two, it could, depending if we open this up to a lot of folks, would impact our staff's ability to be able to work in their rooms, provide the tutoring that needs to be done, prepare for lessons in that time period directly after school. We're not saying people can't use it. We're just saying they couldn't use it till 6 o'clock. We're protecting that after school time. And we're not saying they couldn't use it. We just would be following our board adopted policy or pricing that we have on that for the non-school use of a for-profit entity.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I can just, from my personal experience in seeing how my two kids use school facilities in the hours between 4 and 6, it is constant and chaotic. I mean, there is no rhyme or reason whether they need to go to a tutorial on Tuesday or they've got some other after-school group they're meeting with. I mean, but it's fairly consistent that they're using that. And I think unless you see a reason to change that, I can tell you as a parent of students, I can see a reason not to, because I know who's using that space. It's teachers and club sponsors that are part of the school. And I don't want to see anything interfere with that. I was impressed with the group. It seems like a neat program. The problem I have is if we do one, it looks like we have to do them all. I don't know that the administration is probably ready to start trying to manage that and what all that could mean. But I don't know. I mean, to me, I just want you to know that personally, the hours between 4 and 6, I like you protecting that.
I agree with Mr. Harris. I think that though the official school day ends, when the bell rings, the learning and the interaction between students and the teachers and the staff does not conclude. Having had several children go through the school district, there are many times that you didn't pick them up till 6 o'clock because they weren't done with whatever they were doing, regardless of whether it's on the good side or the bad side, needing to stay. And we had a range in our family. But I do think it's important to maintain that it is the facilities are there for the district to use until 6:30, and then if a entity wants to pay the fee structure to use it afterwards. And I agree. I thought that there was a lot to be said about the program. I just don't think with how much we're growing and how many things our district provides for our students that it's appropriate to push them away or make them have to adjust for someone else to use that space. I don't see that at this time. Any other comments or
I'm a huge supporter of the performing arts. I would have loved to have like something like that on our campus. I could see how it would serve a need for some of our kids. But I can tell you what I'm not going to do is be in the business of picking one group versus picking another. And what I don't want to do is put you in that same position, which is what you'd end up doing, right? Which is, you know, would it be a big deal to let this one group come on campus and do their thing? The answer to that would probably be no. But by letting that one group come in, it's not going to be one group. It's going to be sooner or later 5 groups, 6 groups, 7 groups, and then it starts to interfere with things that Mr. Harris and Dr. Yokin have already said. So I loved what they were doing, and I support them. I just it's a hard line to drop. So
I'm in agreement, and I'll tell you why. You know, there's a lot of programs around the town that they provide transportation, and this is, you know, for profit, and they could provide, you know, transportation and to pick up and take to a facility that they could use. I don't. It has nothing to do with their program. I just have seen other. I mean, you look at some of these gymnastics. I think about this often. You know, they put a bus together that has a gym in the bus and brought it to the campuses for them to use, you know, outside the facility. And there's just ways to get around it, and I understand what they're thinking and how they're doing, but you can capture, we capture them through church events too. We have choir that we come and pick them up. I mean, there's a way to capture these kids without them having to actually be, I understand it helps them be in one place, and it's convenient that way. But particularly a for-profit could build in a transportation fee that they could come and pick up these kids and bring them to some place that they have for them to do. We're not saying they can certainly have a place to do the arts.
I think it was very good having the discussion. It's better than the answer, this is what we've always done. And that was basically the answer that I received was, we're not doing this because we haven't done it. And so I think it was good to have this discussion of listen to all the reasons why not. That was my goal.
Anything else? With that, we're going to adjourn, and we'll be back